Thank you, John, for that introduction, and hi, everyone. This is my project, Mouthline and dorsal fin injuries as an indicator of fishery interactions in pygmy killer whales around the main Hawaiian Islands. Some background is that fishery interactions are a major global threat to cetaceans and can result in injury, mortality, and have long-term population impacts. These interactions include bycatch, entanglement, and depredation, which occurs when cetaceans remove bait or catch from fishing gear. In Hawaiian waters, many Odontocetes species overlap with both commercial and recreational fisheries. However, the impacts of these interactions remain poorly understood for many species in Hawaii, particularly those with small resident populations. A major challenge is that nearshore fisheries in Hawaii currently lack systematic monitoring, meaning that these interactions likely go undocumented. This challenge is especially important for pygmy killer whales because pygmy killer whales are naturally rare, difficult to observe, and one of the least studied cetaceans in Hawaiian waters. Because these populations are small and island associated with strong site fidelity, even low levels of fishery interactions can have impacts at the population level. Because direct observation of these interactions are extremely rare, it is difficult to estimate how frequently they occur. And because direct observations are limited, injuries visible in photo ID images provide important indirect evidence of fishery interactions. So to investigate these fishery-related injuries, I used archival photo ID data collected by Cascadia Research Collective between 1986 and 2025. Overall, more than 115,000 archival photo ID images representing 750 individuals from both resident and pelagic populations were reviewed manually. The workflow here summarizes the methods used in this study. First, photographs were matched and cataloged by Cascadia Research Collective, and then images of the mouthline and dorsal fins were polled for scoring. Two independent reviewers scored injuries using standardized protocols, and overall scores were assigned for individuals. Using two reviewers helped reduce subjectivity in scoring and allowed us to evaluate agreement between reviewers. This is particularly important because some injuries can be difficult to distinguish from natural markings, pigmentation, or other non-fishery related injuries. Additionally, images were filtered by photo quality, distinctiveness, and mouthline analysis required at least 50% or more of the mouthline to be visible. In addition, removal of undeterminable scores was applied before analyses. All statistical analysis were conducted in RStudio, and photo management was used for ACDC Pro or Nomax. Here we have some examples of the dorsal fin scoring system used in this study. Individuals were classified into three categories. A score of 1 represents individuals that had injuries not consistent with fishery-related injuries. A score of 2 represents individuals that had injuries possibly consistent with fishery interactions, while a score of 3 have injuries consistent with fishery interactions. So some of the injuries include dorsal fin notches, linear scarring, and collapsed dorsal fins. As you can see here on the image on the far right, shows an individual that was classified as consistent with fishery interactions who has a collapsed dorsal fin. This slide shows the mouthline scoring system. Like dorsal fins, mouthline injuries are classified into not consistent, possibly consistent, and consistent injuries with fishery interactions. Mouthline injuries are especially important because they indicate hooking events associated with deprivation behavior. Examples include heavy scarring around the mouthline and notches on the upper lip. As you can see here on the image on the far right, this individual has a notch on the upper lip that is consistent with a hooking injury, and this individual is classified as consistent with fishery interactions in this study. For the dorsal fin analysis, 203 individuals were excluded during filtering due to photo quality, distinctiveness, undeterminable scores, leaving 547 individuals being retained for analysis. 101 individuals were classified as consistent with fishery interactions, while an additional 48 individuals were classified as possibly consistent with fishery interactions. So overall, 149 individuals, or 27.2%, had injuries at least possibly consistent with fishery interactions. This means that more than 1/4 of the of the individuals included in the dorsal fin analysis exhibited some evidence of fishery interactions. I also evaluated whether injury prevalence differed across populations, sexes, and social clusters. No statistically significant differences were detected between population or sex overall. However, when comparing social clusters within the Oahu main component population, there was a statistically significant difference found specifically between clusters 2 and 3. So although prevalence rates were relatively similar across populations overall, the significantly differences among the Oahu social clusters suggest that some social groups may experience different levels of exposures to fisheries. This likely reflects differences in deprivation behavior among social groups. For the Mouthline analysis, 124 individuals were included after filtering, with 94 individuals being excluded due to image quality, undeterminable scores, or insufficient mouthline coverage. Of these 124 individuals, 29 were classified as having injuries consistent with fishery interactions. Additional 17 individuals were classified as having injuries possibly consistent with fishery interactions. So overall, 46 individuals, or 37.1%, had injuries at least possibly consistent with fishery interactions. So this means that more than 1/3 of the individuals included in the Mouthline analysis showed at least some injury possibly consistent with fishery interactions. No statistically significant differences were found between sexes, populations, or social clusters. However, I did find that mouthline visibility was weakly positively correlated with injury detection, suggesting that injuries may be easier to identify when more of the mouthline is visible. This also suggests that mouthline injuries are likely underestimated due to incomplete photographic coverage. I also compared individuals that had both mouthline and dorsal fin scores available. A total of 118 individuals had complete classifications for both body regions. 27 individuals had dorsal fin injuries consistent with fishery interactions, while 28 individuals had mouthline injuries consistent with fishery interactions. However, only 8 individuals were classified as consistent in both categories. This suggests that dorsal fin and mouthlines capture different types of fishery-related injuries, and that relying on only one body region may underestimate the true prevalence rate of these interactions. So studies that rely solely on dorsal fin imagery may systematically underestimate the frequency of these interactions involving hookings, leading to incomplete or biased assessments of interaction rates. While dorsal fin-based injury assessment remains a valuable and accessible metric, it should be used and interpreted as a minimum estimate of injury frequency. The study provides the first assessment of fishery-related mouthline and dorsal fin injuries across population, sexes, and social clusters of pygmy killer whales in Hawaii. Overall, fishery interactions appear to be relatively widespread across populations. These interactions are likely linked to deprivation behavior and overlap of nearshore and slope-associated fisheries. An important finding from the study was that mouthlines were more common than dorsal fin injuries, and this suggests that mouthline images may better detect hooking-related injuries than dorsal fins alone. More broadly, long-term photo ID data catalogs represent an especially valuable resource for researchers because they allow us to assess human impacts across decades using minimally invasive samplings. These methods are particularly useful for cryptic or difficult to study species where direct observations are rare. Although the study provides important baseline information, several research gaps remain. One of the largest limitations is that the mouthline injuries are likely underestimated because many individuals lack sufficient mouthline photo coverage. Additionally, sample sizes were also limited for some social clusters and sex comparisons. Importantly, photo ID methods only capture surviving individuals, creating survivor bias, meaning these methods likely underestimate the total impacts of fishery interactions because mortality cannot be directly assessed. Consequently, the patterns documented here may reflect survivorship among individuals repeatedly exposed to fishery interactions, rather than the full magnitude of fishery-related mortality occurring in these populations. Future research should prioritize collecting more high-quality head and mouthline photos and incorporating additional information such as age class, temporal analyses, and increased genetic sampling. Another important direction is estimating the timing of injuries and tracking injury prevalence over time to better understand long-term trends and potential changes in fishery interactions. I would like to thank my thesis reader, Dr. John Withy, for your guidance and support throughout this process. And a huge shout out to everyone at Cascadia Research Collective who supported this project in numerous ways. Dr. Robin Baird, your feedback and immense knowledge was extremely helpful. Especially, I'd like to thank Annette Harnish for your guidance through every step of this project, and Sabra for your management and extensive knowledge of the pygmy killer whale catalog. Thank you to all the community and scientists members who contributed photos to the pygmy whale catalog, and everyone at MES, my teammates and coaches, and family and friends for your support. And thank you all for being here. Any questions?